Good afternoon. Welcome to the Chicken Box. It is a beautiful Thursday. I'm feeling great. You know, when you wake up, you should just say to yourself, you're feeling great. No matter what's going on in the world, you have a choice in your own space and own mind to say, I am feeling great. You could concentrate on your back hurts a little bit, or your knee hurts, or your leg hurts, and you can just say that to everybody else all day, or you can just say, I'm grateful and I feel great. Jay Jackson, how are you this morning?
I'm well.
Afternoon,
I'm well. Yeah, I'm doing very well. I'm very excited about today's episode, actually. So, yeah,
our
let's do
global team.
it.
At the Afro, over 133 years, we just celebrated a birthday. Happy birthday, Afro. We're now not just a newspaper anymore. We're now a media company. So we're global. Jay is out of the country. I'm in Atlanta. And we got the company picnic going on that we're not at. So we're going to be here talking to one of the, well, I can't wait to get this conversation started. But if you've never tuned into the Chicken Box, let me just give you a quick. In Baltimore, Chicken Box is four wings and fries, salt, pepper, ketchup. Some people like hot sauce on it. And in most parts of the country, they call it an Arnold Palmer. But in Baltimore, they call it a half and half. And that's sweet tea. Don't get it mistaken for unsweet tea because you'll hate it. So a sweet tea and lemonade. so I'm always hungry right when this show starts. Anyway, that's how the Chicken Box started. But here, you get on the box and you speak your truth. The beautiful thing about your truth is I don't have to agree with you. And I don't have to get angry with you because I don't agree with your choice. Everybody's angry. You like blue, I like orange, fine. We can agree to disagree. Jay, who do we have joining us today on the show?
Okay, so today we have Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, PhD, who is president emerita of Spelman College. She served as the 9th president of Spelman from 2002 to 2015. Her visionary leadership as president was recognized in 2013 with the Carnegie Academic Leadership Award. In 2014, she received the award for outstanding lifetime contribution to psychology, the highest honor presented by the American Psychological Association. She's also the author of 4 books, including the New York Times bestselling Why Are All Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? In her most recent book, that's released September 2nd of this year, called Peril and Promise, Dr. Tatum argues that the American universities hold the key to addressing the ignorance and division that threaten our society, if bold and courageous leadership is willing to step up. Blending insights from social science with years of experience as president of Spelman and Mount Holyoke colleges, she offers powerful leadership lessons for navigating today's challenges, alongside an unflinching look at financial, political, and social pressures facing higher education. She shares real-world examples of institutions that have overcome the steepest odds and created true transformation in student bodies, ideas, and society. So welcome to the show, Dr. Tatum.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So your book, your previous book that I mentioned, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, that's actually in my wife's office. So I am familiar with your work. So welcome to the show. This couldn't be more timely of a book. I'm sure that's very purposeful, and I'm just curious as to your thoughts as you've written this book and as you're seeing things unfold with higher education. Just your overall thoughts of what's going on.
Sure. Well, let me start by saying that when I decided to write this book, Peril and Promise, College Leadership in Turbulent Times, the times weren't quite as turbulent as they are now. My initial idea was to reflect on my experience as a college president. I was president of Spelman College for 13 years, and I spent 1 year at Mount Holyoke College as interim president when they were searching for a new president. They were in the presidential search business, and I was holding the fort for them while they did that. And when I did that second responsibility as interim president, it was about 7 years after I had left the presidency of Spelman. And my friend said, why are you going back? I mean, this is the hardest job ever, being a college president. Why would you want to do that again? And all the questions I got made me think people don't really understand college communities, how they run. It's true, it's a challenging position to be a leader of a college or a university, but the questions that people were asking me and the questions that were emerging in the public as higher ed was in the news following the student protests in 2023, and certainly now with the conflicts with the current administration, I thought it was important in my experience as an insider to talk about colleges, how they work, what the challenges are, and what they contribute to our environment, to our society, in a way that the average person could understand and appreciate. So that's what I've tried to do.
Okay, thank you.
I remember back in '96 going down to Morehouse for the very first time. And the Spelman culture was, it was a shock for a guy coming from Baltimore. So as the president, I'm sure you've seen you've seen what, Generation X and, some millennials, and now, I'm sure you come across with the Generation Z. What do you think was the most, we'll get into the book, but just being a president of, especially a prestigious university such as Spelman College, what does it take to stay connected with your student body?
It's a great question, and it's something that I really worked at. I started at Spelman in 2002, and I was president at Spelman until 2015. And one of the things that changed during that time was the use of technology and the emergence of social media. And as you know from your experience, Spelman is right next door to Morehouse College. And when I was president, at the start of my presidency, Dr. Walter Massey was president of Morehouse College. He was followed by Dr. Robert Franklin. And Dr. Franklin at Morehouse had a style that involved really walking the campus, hanging out in the school cafeteria, connecting with students in a face-to-face kind of way.
Mhm.
And to be perfectly honest, that was not my style. And students would say, Dr. Tatum, why don't how come you don't hang out in the cafeteria like Dr. Franklin does? That there was, but I'm just going to own it. I'm an introvert and I don't like to just schmooze in places like that. But I, of course, love connecting one-on-one with people. And I was also traveling a lot away from campus because I was in a big fundraising campaign. And so what I started to do, which turned out to be a great strategy for me, was to use my social media and take pictures of what I was doing and post them. At the time, I was using Twitter. Today, I use Instagram. But if I was having lunch with a Spelman alum who I hoped would support the college in some way, at the end of the lunch, I'd ask her if I could take her picture, and I'd post the two of us together. And usually it was an alum who was doing something really interesting, something, demonstrating the value of her education at Spelman. And then I would say something like, Spelman women are really making a difference in the world. And students love that. They love it. Was kind of like, where in the world is Dr. Tatum today? What is she doing? Who is she talking to? And I found it to be a great way to connect with students. En masse, better for me than hanging out in the cafeteria. But it was a great learning for me that social media could be used in that way, and students would really resonate with it. That generation, it was all about how they were connecting with people too.
Yeah, you became one of the cool, what they call us old people. I got 6 kids and they all say something. One
Well, it was true though. I mean, because when I started, there weren't that many presidents. Now everybody does it, I suppose, using social media. But at the time, it was a new thing, and students did think I was cool. So that was nice.
Excellent. So as far as when we talk about the idea of peril and promise, right? I have many questions because education is such a forefront of what is going on right now with the administration. Yes. and I would argue the sort of blatant attack on higher education.
Yes.
What is your perspective on sort of the rising cost of higher education and how that's, perhaps impacting and creating gaps from a social economic perspective?
Yes.
And so, I mean, there's such a divide. I feel like there's such a divide between sort of what we're seeing from the administration and academia, but then that is sort of exacerbated by the rising cost of academia and, the lay people in society trying to go to college. And so I feel like academia is caught in the middle. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's so much in your question, and I want
Sure.
to speak
So
to
I
all.
apologize if it's too.
No, it's just so. Let's step back 5 years before the current administration. Higher ed was struggling with containing costs. The rising cost of education was one of the challenges that I write about. Why is it expensive? Why it's not expensive? Why is it so expensive? And why does the cost keep going up seemingly so fast? And the answer to that question is pretty simple in some ways. It has everything to do with the fact that it's a labor-intensive business. Most of your costs, 2/3 of your costs, are about paying people, faculty, staff, administrators. And when you have to increase salaries to stay competitive, you don't necessarily grow in size, right? So when a company wants to raise their prices on whatever they produce, Coca-Cola, whatever it is, they are able to raise those prices and then increase what they pay other people. But in higher ed, we're not selling anything except an excellent education. And when students want to enroll, we have to provide the financial aid they need to help them pay for that education if you can. One of the challenges for HBCUs in particular is that because of the historic underfunding of HBCUs, we typically don't have as much financial aid dollars to give out as, let's say, the Harvards and Stanfords and Yales of the world. We don't have billions of dollars in our endowment. Some HBCUs have very small endowments. Spelman is one of the few that has more than 500 million. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when you have to pay the people who work for you more, when you have to invest in your buildings, maybe because they're old and they need upgrades, or you need to invest in technology, new laboratories, et cetera, all of those things mean you need more revenue. And the number one place you get revenue from is what students pay. That's there may be other sources of revenue, what donors give you, what your endowment earns if you have one. But the number one source for most institutions is what students pay. And unless you're dramatically increasing the number of students, which most places cannot do, at least not overnight, the only way to get more revenue from those students is to ask those particular students to pay more. And that's the challenge.
Did that ease up a little bit in your opinion? So from sort of during the Biden administration, you had sort of an unprecedented amount of HBCU funding. I think it was like $17 billion over the course of those 4 years. How did that affect? Did that feel like, oh, okay, this is great, and then this kind of the rug gets pulled from under you, post COVID? How does that work?
It's a complicated question because the first thing I want to say is, I was not leading during the time of President Biden's tenure, but having said that, when you get more support from the federal government, that's a good thing.
Right.
Full stop. More support from the federal government, assuming it doesn't have a lot of strings attached to it. Some of what's happening right now is all about tying strings to that funding. But
I was going to ask you about that later, so that's great. Thank you.
But, increased funding from the federal government is a benefit, and certainly that's a good thing. When Pell Grants go up and students have more grant money that they can use to pay tuition, that is also a good thing. But then there are other things that are challenging. When we look at, for example, increased burdens around regulation. When I want to take us back for just a second to 2001, 9/11. When 9/11 happened, there was a lot of concern about foreign students in the country and who was coming in. And at that time, it was around, concerns about the Middle East and the conflicts that the United States was having because of 9/11. Similarly, today, fast forward to today, there are questions being raised about international students, who's coming, how are they being vetted, etc. Well, when the government says you, college, university, must do a better job of tracking who's coming from outside the United States and are you fully vetting them? Somebody has to do that work. Who's going to do that work? If you don't have somebody on staff who is trained and able to do it, you have to hire someone. I'm just using this as an example to say when the government says you must do X, Y, or Z, that usually means somebody has to be hired to do that. If you have, and that increases your cost. So the more that there's a demand for you to do something you weren't already doing, the more you have to spend to try to meet that demand. That's just one example. Not to mention AI. We are hearing a lot about AI right now, and everybody wants to understand how to use it, how it can enhance learning, how to help students learn how to use it, how to train faculty so that they can help students to learn how to use it. All of that means spending more money. So as we think about the ways in which colleges have to be nimble and respond to the changing world around them, often that means making an investment with dollars they may or may not have.
Thank you. Sorry, I realized my question was incredibly broad, so I apologize.
No,
but
right. I'm here. I'm taking notes like I'm in classes. I'm like, wait a minute. If you just tuned in, this is the Chicken Box broadcasting and powered by the Afro News. Go to afro.com. We are Black owned, Black operated.
I have to tell you something because I'm bursting to tell you, when you were doing your introduction and you talked about your 100-year history, I have to tell you that my family is a part of that history because my grandmother.
You know what? We're gonna pause for the cause right now. Go ahead, Dr.
Yes,
Tatum.
I have to tell you that my grandmother, Constance Hazel Daniel, was a reporter for when it was called the Afro American
newspaper, right?
Yes.
What year was that? Do you remember?
When you were saying that.
I'm going to ask you just to put it in the chat, and we'll see if I can.
Yes, her name, Constance Hazel Daniel.
Okay, Constance. Shout out to Constance. We're going to go back in the archives and see what she wrote about.
That's amazing.
When was she there? Do you remember the era?
My guess is probably in the 40s, 50s, maybe 60s.
All right, she's back there with the typewriter.
Yes, definitely with the typewriter. And
whiteout. Shout out to Con. You know the Afro family. It touches so many people. You never know who, and you'll be surprised when you look at our archives. If you go to afrocharities.org, and you just put in a name, and people are finding.
I'm gonna do that.
They're finding their relatives. They're finding pictures of relatives they've never seen. I mean, we have probably one of the most extensive archives in African American history anywhere, I would say, and it's currently being restored and digitized now, and it'll be a home for it in about a year in Baltimore. A whole new, wonderful space that will house all those wonderful archives. So you're part of the family now. We can just call you Bev. We don't have to call you Bev.
You do that.
So let's get back to Peril and Promise. So what made you title the book? What inspired you to title that book?
Well, I'm going to tell you something. I had another title in mind originally, and that title was "Who in Their Right Mind Would Want That Job?" And I was going to, and my publisher said, people who work in higher education will get that. They'll get the humor of that title, "Who in Their Right Mind Would Want That Job?" But other people probably won't. And your book is not a negative book. It's a very positive book. It's, as she said, we think it's an inspiring book. So you need a new title. So I noodled on it. And then I thought, well, really it is. It's about the peril that's facing higher education today. But a lot of it is also about the promise. What is the transformational nature of the educational experience, not just for the individual, but for society? There is something that in 1946, President Truman, Harry Truman, commissioned a group of 8 people to study the purpose of higher education in the United States. And they wrote a very long report. But in that long report, they said 3 things. And I think those 3 things are still true. 1, education is really important for a democracy. For the health of a democracy, you need educated citizens. Education, college, higher education, is also important for international understanding and cooperation. And we certainly see that when international students come to the United States, they make friends. It's the kind of soft diplomacy that people talk about. When they go back home, they have a positive view of the United States and the people they met and studied with and all of that. And the third thing, which I think is so critical, higher education is the application of creative imagination and trained intelligence to the solution of social problems. You bring smart people together, give them the tools to think critically about social problems and come up with solutions. We see so much evidence of that throughout our history, and certainly we need it now more than ever.
At minute 20, I'm going to go back because I'm going to write that down. That needs to go into my, you say it one more time, just the last one, creative.
Yes, the application of creative imagination and trained intelligence to the solution of social problems.
That's almost AI, huh?
A little bit.
Except it's our human intelligence.
That's right. That's our own AI. So
yes,
when you say peril, that means that we're in a dangerous moment right now.
We are in a dangerous moment. I think we are in a dangerous moment. And politically, I mean, I just want to, I'm happy to say this on your chicken box, right? I want to say that the political threat to higher education is so concerning because it encompasses not just politics, but the financial pressure, cultural pressure. When government leaders insist that institutions conform to a particular set of cultural norms, whether that's dictating what will be taught and what won't, as some state legislators are trying to do, what speech will be allowed and what won't, who will be welcomed as part of the community and who isn't or won't be, and use their control of much needed financial resources like grants, like access to federal financial aid, like visas for tuition paying international students, as a lever to force people to do what you want, to force compliance. The very existence of the institution is under threat. And I think we have to really acknowledge the nature and the severity of that threat and speak up against it.
Yes, I 100% agree. It is very interesting that we are sort of 8, almost 9 months into this nightmare, or there's other choice words you could use, I'm sure. And I am baffled that some people don't understand the moment that we're in, and sort of kind of downplaying it. But I feel like maybe it just hasn't reached them personally, and unfortunately, hopefully it never does, and we get through this. But I doubt it, unfortunately. And so you made a point about kind of where academics, or especially higher education, is being directly put under threat, right? And this idea of these strings being put with, like, okay, you want federal funding, but we're going to need you to clamp down on student protests, which is, to me, historically, is one of the wildest things I've ever heard. I mean, the current administration has quite literally made it a personal vendetta, or the president very specifically has made it a personal vendetta against Columbia University, and largely because they wouldn't buy a property that he wanted years ago.
I read that article, yes.
Yeah, it's wild. And it's funny because my wife is a graduate of that university, and we're both just like reading and shaking our heads, like insane. But to that point, how do we thread the needle, or how do these institutions thread the needle of accepting federal funding, which they desperately need? As you said, any additional federal funding is always a good thing, and I would tend to agree with you. I think most people would. But how do you deal with that and keep your own sort of sovereignty, right? Because yes, it's happening right now, and maybe the next president stops doing this and says, hey, this is crazy, we're done with this. But then maybe the person after that decides, hey, let's go back to what we're doing now. So how do you build a firewall for these universities to feel safe do they just try to go out on their own and say, okay, we don't accept federal funding, which I think would be really difficult for them, or what's the balance there?
Well, one of the things you said at the very beginning, I think, is key to the solution. And that is you made reference to your wife, who was a graduate of Columbia, right? All of these institutions have thousands of alums who are out in the world doing good things as a consequence of the education they received from that particular, not Columbia specifically, but from the institution that they attended. You know, every college and university has a network of graduates who are out in the world making a difference. And I think if those graduates collectively stood up and said, hands off, you know, you are destroying one of the best things about American society, the access to higher education. Our higher education system has been the envy of the world until recently. And I think that we will all deeply regret its, I hesitate to use the word destruction, but degradation. You know, the ways in which it's being reduced. I know, and I write about this in my book, that the current administration has been influenced in some ways by what Viktor Orban has done in Hungary with Hungarian institutions, really trying to seize control, replace the leadership, take control of the boards, and force institutions to, for example, eliminate gender studies as one area of scholarship that is not allowed in Hungary. And I think to myself, okay, but name one great Hungarian university. You know, that when people look to great universities, they look to places like Harvard and Yale and Columbia and Stanford and University of Chicago, as well as the great HBCUs. I don't want to leave those out.
No, of course not.
But my point here is that what's happening now, particularly at the Ivy League, because those are the schools that are really being most visibly assaulted, some of the flagship universities like UCLA, UC Berkeley, some of the flagship state institutions as well. But though that assault is an assault on an institution that has thousands and thousands of graduates. And if those graduates all banded together to say, we will not have this, we don't support this, I think it could make a difference.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that. Using the grads as a way, sort of as a bulwark to stop bending the knee to the administration. Another point, and I'll let my co-host go after that. There's a recent report that came out that the Justice Department is no longer going to defend the idea of grants for institutions that are giving, colleges that are giving grants for Latino students, right? Because they were trying to, since I want to say since like 2020 or maybe it's actually 2001 or something like that, trying to boost up the amount of Latino students who are graduating from college because they were lagging behind sort of national white students numbers. And I saw this, and the first thing I thought is, well, one, that's terrible, and this is obviously very purposeful for the time, but I can't help but to think that HBCUs are also sort of next on the docket for this. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that, and I don't know how much you've kind of looked into this. I'm just curious your thoughts.
Well, I do know that this, what has been referred to as HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution, and I actually write about this in the book, that when we look at how the federal government has funded institutions, there's some of the funding comes through research grants, right? And we've heard a lot about those grants being cut and the attack on science, et cetera. But there also have been funds set aside for institutions that serve underrepresented populations, right? So historically, there has been funding for HBCUs, and HBCUs are defined very specifically as those institutions that existed before 1965, or before 1964, and were created in response to segregation, right? Now, there are also institutions that are now called PBIs, predominantly Black institutions. They didn't start out that way. They didn't start out as serving specifically African American populations, but over time, their population has become predominantly Black, and
Sure.
they're referred to as PBIs. And then there are institutions that are Hispanic serving. If they have, I think the percentage is 25%, at least 25% of their students are Hispanic, then they're categorized as HSIs. And, you know, you can go on. There's institutions that are designated as serving a certain percentage of Asian American, Native American, et cetera. The point being that there have been funds, not very many, not a lot, it's not a big number, right? But there have been funds that were set aside for those institutions from the federal government for which they could apply. It wasn't automatic, but they could apply for funding. HSIs could, institutions serving PBIs could, predominantly Black institutions, et cetera. There also have been funds that historically have been designated just for HBCUs. And you were asking about that earlier, about the increase in funding that came during the Biden administration. President Trump has, on a number of occasions, spoken to his intent to support and continue supporting HBCUs. I have a kind of cynical view of that, in part because at the same time that he said he wants to support HBCUs, his administration has also been pushing to question the admission of students of color to these Ivy League schools, right? You know, questioning whether they are following the law after the Supreme Court decision. Let me just pause there and kind of explain this for your audience. When the Supreme Court ruled that affirmative action was no longer justifiable, it was no longer allowable under the Constitution. When that ruling took place, many people expected the enrollment of Black and brown students to dramatically decline at Ivy League schools, places like Harvard and Yale and Columbia, et cetera. The year after that ruling, the year after the Supreme Court ruling, there was a lot of interest in what happened on those campuses. Did, in fact, the numbers of Black and brown students drop dramatically? Well, the answer is it dropped, but not dramatically. And so because it didn't drop dramatically, some people said they must not be following the law. They must not be giving up those race-conscious admissions practices. How is it possible that if you weren't taking race into consideration, that you would still have a significant number of Black and brown students being admitted? I think that is really problematic, right? Because it presumes that those students couldn't get in any other way, right?
Right.
They were
bigotry of low expectations.
Yes, they had low expectations, and they expected to see a dramatic drop in the admission of Black and brown students. They expected a dramatic rise in the admission of Asian American students. And there was a rise in some places, but in some places there was actually a drop. So it didn't go the way people were predicting. And the predictors said, what's wrong with this picture? They must be cheating. And so now the federal government is hot on the trail to find the cheaters, right? Because they assume that there must have been some cheating going on for this result to occur. There are perfectly good ways to describe what happened without assuming that the institutions cheated. And it speaks to the fact that institutions have been historically and continue to look at the whole student, not just did you have a perfect score on your SAT, not, I'm going to use Harvard as an example. Harvard could fill every single spot in its entering class with a student who had a perfect SAT score. But they don't want to. That's not the only thing they're interested in. They want a well-rounded class with students with all kinds of talents. And scoring perfectly on your SAT doesn't get you that if that's the only thing you're paying attention to. Right. So I think the question of how schools admit students, how they decide who they want to admit and why cannot be oversimplified in the way that the Trump administration seems to be trying to oversimplify it. That said, we also know that if you say we support HBCUs, but we don't want too many Black students going over here, that kind of harkens back to the logic of the 1950s, if you ask me.
Mhm.
And that is part of the problem in our current conversation.
Yeah. No,
Wow,
I
we've heard
agree.
I said, no, we've heard the problem, and this is a conversation that will span way past this little podcast and needs to be addressed. But thank you for speaking up, because a lot of people are just sitting, and I'm not just talking about Black people. I'm just talking about all Americans that aren't agreeing with what's going on in our nation now, and just doing nothing, pretty much, not speaking about it. They're talking, like I said when we first started. They just continue to hammer the problem every single day, and we're not talking about how we unite and the solutions. And as a Black business and as Black institutions, how do we become self-sufficient? Like, how do we take care of our own institutions without needing a handout, Dr. Tatum?
It's a great question, and one of the things that I worked on a lot when I was president of Spelman was just this very question: how can we increase our resources so that we can deliver the best possible education for the students, young Black women who are coming through our gates? What would it take so that we could provide the financial aid they need, so they don't have to go someplace else? They can come to Spelman and have the financial aid they need. What would it take to be able to invest in the infrastructure, the buildings, the labs, to provide all the opportunities that we want those students to have? And one of the ways I thought we could improve our ability to do that, and we did improve our ability to do that, but one of the things I thought was essential was the support of our alums, our graduates. Many HBCUs have very low level of financial support coming back to them from their graduates. And some people would say, well, it's because their graduates aren't making that much money. I'm not talking about the amount of money someone gives. I'm talking about the percentage of students who actually are making a gift on an annual basis to their
Well, we were
institution.
having this conversation about an endowment for Morgan State University, just in Kappa Alpha Psi, and we were saying it's not so much about what you can give; it's just, can you constantly give? If I can give Netflix
Yeah,
$19 a month, can I give
Right.
my HBCU on a recur? You got all these things on recurring billing, and some things you don't
yeah.
even know that it's recurring. But is any of it recurring to our institutions? I think if you especially been an HBCU graduate, you have a responsibility to keep the doors open so that somebody else has an opportunity. I'm
Yes.
on, I'm on the box right now. Okay, so anyway, this is
No,
impeccable.
but I'm with you 100%. And if you know a Spelman alum, she loves her institution. Spelman women are very proud of Spelman. And I was surprised when I started in 2002 to see that only 13% of our graduates at that time were giving a gift on an annual basis. I thought it should be much higher. What I learned, which was really important, was that many of our alums were making a gift to the institution, but they did it when they came back for a reunion. Now, the
Mhm.
problem with that is that reunion occurs once every 5 years, right? So you're making a gift once every 5 years, but the institution needs it once every year, at least every year. And so I stopped as a president going out and saying, please support our institution. Because when I'd say, how many of you have made a gift to the college? Everybody raised their hands. And I'd say, well, only 13%. It can't be everybody. But then I discovered it was everybody, but not every year. And
Mm.
Right.
so then our slogan became every woman, every year, right? We need that number to go up. And over time, it did. So I take a great deal of pride in the fact that we started at 13%. By the time I retired, we were up to 41%. which is much higher than the national average. But I still say it should be 100%. Every
Right.
woman, every year, and every institution. And sometimes people are, annoyed with their institution. Maybe they didn't like the article in the quarterly magazine, or maybe they didn't like what the president said on Chicken Box, or whatever it is.
Right.
People, people sometimes get upset, but at the end of the day, what we have to say is what you were just saying, about making sure the pathway is open for the next generation. You know, you don't have to like me personally, but how about supporting the institution? Because presidents come and presidents go. But if we want the institution to live forever, we have to support it on an annual basis.
I think it's like you said. It's the maybe it's the ask has to change, and the mindset, because I think people will. I mean, I think they would even recur $10 or $15.
Mhm.
Obama raised all of this money with just small little contributions, and I think if each institution did the math to see, okay, we have X amount of alumni. Here's our budget. This is what we need from this group of people to
Yes.
really help us sustain ourselves, then we wouldn't be hit so hard. We don't need to be out there begging these folks who don't care about us anyway. They want
Yeah,
to sit
well,
us over in the
there
corner.
there are a lot of resources in the
Yeah,
African American community that could be directed to HBCUs. And one of the things that I am very appreciative of, and I can't say it enough, of there were many generous people who made gifts to the college. One of those gifts came not during my time, but from someone I knew when I was president. A couple made $100 million gift to Spelman College, in 1924. Not 1924. I'm so sorry. 2024.
I'm about
In
to say, man, those are
in-
paid for the college forever. Then
yeah, yeah. In 2024, Rhonda Stryker and her husband, Bill Johnston, made $100 million. This is a white couple, made that gift to Spelman College because they really believe in what the college is doing. More power to them, and much gratitude. But there are Black people who could maybe not make $100 million gift, but $1 million gift, a $10 million gift. But to your point, $100 a month goes a long way if it comes every month from a lot of people every year.
absolutely. Jay, we're talking with Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum on the Chicken Box. Everybody, former president of Spelman University from 2002 to 2015, a good 13 years. Is that right?
Yes.
A good 13 years. You got a chance to see the campus evolve and change. I went back the other day. One of my friends is the GM of Morehouse football now. So just to go back on the campus, it is a lot of changing and growing, and all of that costs money. But you have your book, Peril and Promise, that is out right now. You can go. Where is it available? Everywhere where books are.
Everywhere where books are sold. And a shout out to bookshop.org. If you order it online from bookshop.org, it will support your local independent bookstore.
Look up in there one more time. I know you had it somewhere near. You have it close?
Yes, yes, I've got the book right here in my hand.
In case you just stumble by it and say, hey, I know I've seen that somewhere before, but there it is.
Peril and Promise.
It is. You got a bunch of notes in there. You wrote the book.
I did write the book, and I reference it all the time.
Excellent.
All the time.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
The time is running down. Thank you. If you're watching, not live, but and at your leisure, please pick up the book and open your mouth and open your pocketbooks and your wallets and your digital wallets and your credit cards, and give to our institutions, because we're the only one. Nobody's coming to save us, people. Not one person. You got a couple people who have a grateful heart, and they do some extraordinary things, but for the most part, we all we have. I forget it. I said that like that because it's Dr. Tatum. I usually would say we all we got. So we'll go with that. Jay, any final words?
I have one final question before we get on the box here. So we talked a lot and I feel like my questions were sort of maybe a little dreary. So I wanted to sort of end my questions on a little bit of a hopeful perspective. And I think that a lot of people look to hope. They generally look to history as, okay, we've done these things before, we have overcome these things before, especially in our community for obvious reasons. Do you have examples that you could, that you think about or that you cite in your many notes in your own book, that these HBCUs and other colleges have dealt with before and how they've overcome similar situations? I mean, things seem pretty dire, but I don't think they're completely unprecedented. So I'm just curious as to what do you look for in the past to say, yeah, but we've been here before.
Well, you know what? I do look to the past for inspiration, for sure. You know, when I was president of Spelman, there were times that were very challenging. I think of, you know, right this minute, I'm talking to you when I'm hearing a lot of reflection on Hurricane Katrina, right? And when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, it, you know, all those HBCUs in New Orleans, right? Dillard, Xavier, really took a hit. And sitting in Atlanta, we received students who were escaping New Orleans, looking for a place where they could be given some shelter and continue their education. We took in students from Hurricane Katrina. That's just one example. But I think about, too, what happened in 2008 when the economy tanked and so many Black people lost their jobs, not unlike what's happening now in terms of loss of, you know, all those federal employees, many of whom African-American, losing employment. What does that mean if you're in school and all of a sudden your parent has lost their job? How can you stay in school? You need the support of the institution to kind of help you make it over the finish line. There have been lots of challenges, but when I was in the midst of those challenges, I thought about the founders and the early graduates. You know, Spelman opened in 1881, not that long after the end of the Civil War. The idea of educating Black women was not a popular idea. And yet the founders, the people who supported the institution, the faculty, the students themselves rallied and persisted to ensure that Spelman would continue and would survive. You know, here we are 100+ years later, right? And still we have institutions that have continued, have survived, are persisting. So the perseverance, not just of the leaders, but of the graduates, what they were doing and how they contributed to society is a source of inspiration every day. And I think we should look to that example to say they persisted, so can we.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that.
Guys, it is getting near the time. Dr. Beverly, what part of the world are you located in now?
I'm coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, so yeah, I'm in the Atlanta metro area myself. Maybe, you know, at least if we run into you, be like, I know you from somewhere. No, I'm going to come up and say hello. We thank you for your work and for your service. Who's the current president at Spelman right now?
Right now, the president of Spelman is Roz Brewer, who is the interim president. President Helene Gale stepped down from her position in November of 24, and Roz Brewer, who was the former CEO of Walgreens Boots Alliance, I think is the name of the company. She had been chair of the board for a long time, and stepped up to provide that leadership while the institution decides who they'd like to be their permanent president. So she's serving as interim president right now.
Right, because my good friend Dr. Stephen Keith, I think, was married to the one.
Yes, Helene Gale.
Right. So small world. Anyway, guys, this is the Chicken Box. We're hanging out with author, former president, educator, and I guess the voice of the voiceless in education. She's pushing the narrative forward. She's telling us what's in front of us. She's speaking up for the danger that's ahead of us, but also she doesn't just tell us about the bad and the problems. She tells us about the hope. And that's where the promise comes in. And that's why I kind of like, I even like that it follows. Okay, it's danger, but here's the promise, right? So that's kind of how God works. Okay, here's danger over here, but here's the promise. So if I can hold on to the promise, I think I'll make it. We can
navigate the peril.
absolutely. We can feel. I'm okay. I'm gonna get on. I'm on the chicken box now. We can feel any way we feel about the current situation, but this too will pass. You got to just think back when you brought this history up of our ancestors and what we went through. There was no air conditioning. There was no internet. It was still. It might not even have been electricity. It might not even been a floor. You might not even had really a good shelter, and we survived. We're amazing individuals that God made, and we will survive this short negative stint. These institutions don't last that long, that many years, by buckling every time somebody wants to run off at the mouth or somebody wants to change the policy, because policies can be changed back. Just got to weather the storm, and you got to speak up. So thank you, Dr. Tatum, for speaking up. Guys, get on the box, support your institutions, especially our African American and our Black institutions. We need each other. Whatever that $1 billion spending power, let's direct some of it right over here to these institutions. I'm off the box. You'll be last, Dr. Tatum. Jay, you're officially on the box.
All right. So I have a very weird story, but it connects to what you were saying earlier, Dr. Tatum. You mentioned the idea of sort of creatively thinking about these ideas, and that's how sort of we can actually overcome them. But we got to kind of, for lack of a better phrase, we got to think out of the box here. So incidentally, like the Afro is in Baltimore, and one of the most interesting stories I've ever heard, one of my schools that I went to, was at MICA, which is the Maryland Institute College of Art. Some kids got tasked with helping to design a toy for an elephant at the Baltimore City Zoo that the engineers, like just regular engineers, couldn't do because they were thinking about it in a particular way, and the elephants would just destroy it, right? But they asked some random art kids to figure this out, and they had to do a collaboration with these students, and they were able to figure it out because they could think in a more creative way than the standard 1, 2, 3 down the line sort of design. And I think I think it's a hilarious story in and of itself, but I also think it's indicative of bringing people together who aren't necessarily on the face going to be people to connect to fix these problems. And I think connecting folks in academia, people with these sort of high-level experiences, also people from an activist perspective, and everyone in between are the way that we solve these problems and shore up our institutions can weather the storm of what we're going through. And I think you're absolutely right that people will miss these institutions as they're degraded over time. And I think it's better for us to, for lack of a better term, fight together in these unique sort of ways than to just all have little fiefdoms that then get kind of picked off. And so I think education is a real battleground for what the country looks like when we eventually get out of this. So I appreciate your work. I appreciate the ideas that you're putting forth in your book. So I look forward to reading it. It comes out September 2nd. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, sure.
You are,
and now it is your turn.
Dr. Tatum. You are now going into the history of archives, was it your aunt?
My grandmother.
Oh, that was your grandmother. Okay.
Yeah,
so
Constance.
You're going in the archives in a different way. You're going in live video and audio. She will be in print and ink, but it's still the same archives. And thank you for being here. We're glad to store this history as we move forward. Dr. Tatum, you're officially on the box. Final words.
My final words are persist. We do have a challenging moment in front of us, but Dr. King once said, after every period of social progress, there's pushback against that progress. And while the pushback feels intense, it says to me that there was a lot of progress against which is now being pushed. If we could progress before, we can progress again.
Excellent. That's a great quote. Thank you. Well.
No, I was on mute because I was getting excited. I didn't want nothing to rustle around doing that powerful. Listen, you guys go back, and if you missed it, there's some great things that being said. Take some notes, guys. AI makes it beautiful that you can just put a recording in, and it can take notes, and you can really get some key points. And I think that you should learn something new every day. And remember, call a senior. They haven't heard from you guys all week, all month, maybe all year, not since the last family reunion, and they're home. They're maybe not too tech savvy, but they'd love to hear from you. So don't text them, call them, tell them you love them, maybe do a random act of kindness, go by, bring them something that they weren't expecting, because they have been here before and they've helped us. Every time you call grandma and them for anything, they were there. So now they need you to be there. So I'm off the box today, guys. Go to afro.com. For less than $2 Uber Eats, you can have a digital subscription. That helps us train up the future writers like Dr. Tatum's grandmother. And go to her website right here, Beverly Daniel Tatum.com, and order the book and find out all the great things that she's doing in the community and the world. Until next week, everybody, have a great day. Bye-bye.